with us someone with whom you're probably familiar, Robert Spencer. He's director of Jihad Watch, which is part of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, one of the programs there. He's a New York Times bestseller author of 15 books, or maybe more. 16? 15. Okay, we're going with 15. Translated into over a dozen languages, many of them, which is a wonderful thing. He's led seminars for the FBI, for the military, for the intelligence communities, and we are very privileged to have him with us tonight. He's also a columnist and writer for several national publications. So would you join me in welcoming Robert Spencer?
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm a little distracted this evening, I have to confess, because I was just talking to my wife before this event began, and there's a little bit of trouble with my brother-in-law, her brother. He thinks he's a moth. And I said, well, you know, you really have to get him to a doctor. And she said, well, he did. He ran in this afternoon to a dentist's office, and he said to the dentist, I think I'm a moth. And the dentist said, well, what did you come into my office for? You need a psychologist, not a dentist. And he said, your light was on. And my brother-in-law actually is in the Hillary Clinton administration in line to be Secretary of State. Because we live in an age of unreality. We live in the age that Paul the Apostle spoke about, when men will believe in delusions and falsehoods. And indeed, nowadays, if you don't believe in the delusions and falsehoods, then the mainstream political and media elites will tell you that there's something wrong with you, when it's really they who think they're moths. And the main moth that they think they are is in regard to the jihad threat, the global threat of Islamic jihad and the spread of Sharia Islamic law. The President of the United States and the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister of Great Britain and the President of France and the Chancellor of Germany, certainly, and pretty much, and the Pope, every leader in the Western world will tell you Islam is wonderful. Islam is peace. Islam is tolerance. Islam has made a positive contribution to the United States since its founding. And one thing we must never do whenever Muslims scream Allahu Akbar and kill people or blow themselves up is think that this has anything to do with Islam. And that the first duty they all seem to think they have is to make sure whenever some Muslim does scream Allahu Akbar and then blow himself up in a crowd of infidels or shoot them down, is the first duty that they have is to make sure that we do not think anything negative about Islam. And so I think we are in the age of unreality that would have shocked Paul himself. We are in an age of unreality such that has never been seen before. An age in which unreality is enforced and commanded at the highest levels. And if we don't believe it, then we are racist, bigoted, Islamophobic, horrible people who are full of hate. Now, while all that is happening, there really are Muslims who are screaming Allahu Akbar and killing people and hurting them. Just the other day in Virginia, there was a Muslim screaming Allahu Akbar who stabbed 2 people. Around the same time, within a day or so, there was a Muslim in Australia who was screaming Allahu Akbar, and he stabbed a woman to death. And the Australian police said, this has nothing to do with Islam, you racist, bigoted Islamophobe. This has to do with he was in love with her and she spurned him. And of course, there are all sorts of stories all throughout history of spurned lovers turning to violence in all sorts of cultures. And so it's superficially plausible until you read on and you find out that when he was arrested, he was attacking the police officers. They must have spurned his advances as well. And he was known in the place where they were staying in this hostel for being violent and angry. So apparently everybody in the hostel had spurned his advances. And even more common than unrequited love is mental illness. There are so many cases, I could spend the next hour going through each one, but they're all the same. It's as if they have a template. And whenever there's another Muslim screaming Allahu Akbar and stabbing people or driving into a crowd of infidels with his car or shooting them down and saying then, I did this in the name of Allah, I did this because I'm a Muslim, I did this because I'm allied with ISIS, whatever, then they immediately say, this person had psychological problems. And so I think they must have a pad, you know, a pad with a form in it, and it says, the attack on such and such a date, fill in the date, and fill in the place, was not motivated by Islam, but was a manifestation of the perpetrators, fill in the name, deep-rooted mental illness that had long been noted by doctors. And so I think, you know, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, that is the guidebook for psychologists and psychiatrists, the DSM Manual of Psychiatric Disorders. There ought to be in the next edition a new category of mental illness called jihad. And that would actually, though, that would involve their acknowledging reality a bit too more strongly than people really want to do these days. And so we know that's not going to happen because it's too close to the truth. And the one thing we must not do is get close to the truth. And yet what this does is open up a yawning gap of cognitive dissonance. A gap that makes the Grand Canyon look like a superhighway. There is nothing greater than this cognitive dissonance gap. The difference is this. On the one hand, you have Islamic jihadis saying, I'm doing this because Islam says to kill or to subjugate the infidels under the rule of Islamic law, or to convert them to Islam. And I am doing this so that I can weaken infidel governments or terrorize the infidels in accord with the Quran, and it's all about Islam. And all of our governing authorities say the first thing that we must not recognize about this is that it has anything to do with Islam. That's an absolute unbridgeable gap, and yet there is one way to bridge this yawning canyon of cognitive dissonance, and that is by actually looking at what Islam is all about. And so we're going to do a little Quran study tonight. If you would open your Qurans first You didn't bring it? I won't be home without mine. Chapter 8, verse 60. Prepare against them what force you can, and horses tied at the frontier, to strike terror in the enemies of Allah and your enemies. Same thing, chapter 3, verse 151. We will strike terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve, because they set up with Allah that for which He has sent down no authority, and their abode is the fire. Chapter 8, verse 12. When your Lord revealed to the angels, I am with you, therefore make firm those who believe. I will strike terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve.